After crushing the Persians at the Granicus River, Alexander's legend was already spreading like wildfire across Greece. But the vast Persian Empire had barely even begun to fight back against him. An ancient legend awaited him at the city of Gordium, a puzzle that had defeated every man who ever tried to solve it. And King Darius III was quietly raising the largest army of his reign. What followed would become one of history's most decisive confrontations, a battle where an emperor personally led his own army straight into a trap he never even saw coming. This is Chapter 2, the Gordian Knot and the Battle of Issus. The moment Alexander proved beyond doubt that he could beat Persia's own King of Kings face to face, on his own terms. Marching inland through Asia Minor, Alexander's column arrived at the old Phrygian capital of Gordium, home to a legend that had puzzled ambitious kings for over a century before him. Inside the Temple of Zeus stood an ancient wagon, its yoke bound to the pole by an impossibly intricate knot. Legend promised that whoever untied it would go on to rule the whole of Asia. Alexander circled the knot slowly, studying every loop while generals and priests crowded the temple doorway in tense silence, half expecting the young king to fail exactly like all the rest. Then, without warning, Alexander drew his sword and sliced clean through the knot in a single stroke. The prophecy, he declared, had been fulfilled, and Asia now belonged to him by right. Pressing south into Cilicia, Alexander's army moved fast to outpace Persian reinforcements. At the city of Tarsus, drenched in sweat and overheated, he plunged into the icy waters of the Cydnus River. Within hours, the king collapsed, struck by violent fever and convulsions. His generals feared that the entire campaign and Alexander's life, along with it, were both about to end far too soon. A letter arrived warning that his own physician, Philip, had been bribed by Darius to poison him. Alexander read it in silence. At the exact moment, Philip stepped forward, offering a cup of medicine. Alexander drank the cup without a moment's hesitation, holding his physician's gaze the entire time. A calculated act of trust. The medicine was genuine, and within days, he was back on his feet. While Alexander recovered, King Darius III was quietly assembling the true might of the Persian Empire. An army drawn from every distant corner of his vast and sprawling domain. Persian nobles, Bactrian horsemen, Egyptian archers, and Greek mercenaries all answered the King of Kings' call, together forming a force that dwarfed anything Alexander had ever commanded before. Darius himself would lead this army in person, mounting his royal war chariot, determined to crush the young Macedonian upstart and end this invasion once and for all, before it could spread further. Recovered and restless, Alexander resumed his march south along the coast, entirely unaware that Darius's massive army was already maneuvering behind him to cut off his path completely. In a stunning strategic move, Darius marched his massive army behind Alexander's own forces, seizing the narrow coastal plain of Issus and cutting the Macedonians off from their supply lines entirely. For the first time in the entire campaign, Alexander found his army surrounded, trapped between the sea, the mountains, and a Persian force that outnumbered his own several times over. But Darius had made a critical error. By choosing the narrow coastal plain, he had crammed his own massive army into a space far too tight to use its numbers, erasing his greatest advantage. Alexander saw the opportunity at once and turned his entire army back around to face the trap head-on. Trumpets sounded across the camp. The Battle of Issus was about to begin in earnest. Alexander anchored his phalanx along the shallow Pinarus River, pinning his line between the mountains and the sea, denying Darius any room whatsoever to outflank or encircle his smaller army. The Persian center surged forward first, Greek mercenary hoplites crashing into the Macedonian phalanx in brutal, grinding close combat, shields splintering under the sheer weight of the charge. On the flanks, Persian cavalry thundered across the shallow river crossing, colliding violently with Macedonian riders in a swirling, churning storm of dust, water, and clashing steel. But Alexander had not yet committed his elite companion cavalry. He held them back, scanning the churning Persian line for the one gap that would decide the outcome of the entire battle. Alexander spotted his opening, a gap forming in the Persian line directly opposite Darius's own royal position. He drew his sword and signaled, and the companion cavalry surged forward as one. The charge tore straight through the weakened Persian line, Macedonian lances shattering shields and driving hard toward the very heart of Darius's own terrified personal guard. Watching his personal guard fall and Alexander's cavalry closing fast, Darius made a fateful decision in an instant. He abandoned his royal chariot entirely and fled the battlefield on horseback. The instant word spread that the King of Kings had fled, the entire Persian army began to collapse, panic rippling through the ranks faster than any single sword could ever have cut. Alexander pursued Darius personally for miles across open ground, desperate to capture the fleeing Persian king and end the entire war in a single decisive stroke before nightfall. Darius abandoned his royal chariot, his cloak, and even his own bow in his desperate flight, escaping on horseback into the gathering darkness, just barely staying out of reach. Behind them, the battlefield at Issus lay littered with a scale of Persia's defeat, a victory Alexander had won not through numbers, but through nerve, terrain, and perfect timing. That night, Alexander rode into the captured Persian royal camp and discovered something Darius had left behind in his haste that would change the entire direction of the war. In his haste to flee, Darius had left behind his own mother, his wife, and his children, captured, terrified, and now completely at the mercy of the young king who had just defeated their empire. Rather than humiliate them, Alexander did something almost no conqueror in ancient history had ever done. He treated the captured Persian royal family with complete honor, dignity, and respect. He assured them they would keep their royal titles, their attendants, and every comfort of their former life. A calculated act of mercy that stunned his own men as much as it stunned Persia. Word of his mercy spread across the empire almost as fast as word of his victory had. Alexander was no longer just a conqueror. He was beginning to look like a king Persia itself might accept. Humiliated but very much alive, Darius sent envoys offering peace, his own daughter's hand in marriage, a vast ransom, and all territory west of the Euphrates River in exchange for an end to war. Alexander refused the offer outright. He had not marched this far or fought this hard for half an empire. He intended to take every last piece of it, or none of it at all. With Issus won, Alexander turned his army south along the coast, marching now toward the great fortress city of Tyre and the ports that supplied the entire Persian navy. Darius had escaped, and the war was far from over. The next battle Alexander faced would not be fought on open ground at all, but against walls no army in history had ever managed to break.